If your team doesn't trust you, nothing else matters. You can have the best systems, the sharpest strategy, the clearest roles, but without trust, your team will stall out. And most of the time, trust isn't lost in one big moment. It's lost when people stop feeling seen, heard, and valued. And that is why we teach the trust code, a simple framework that helps you build and rebuild trust through intentional human connection. I'm Eric Pfeiffer, and in this episode, I am again joined by Dawn Neldon, and together we're unpacking how trust is built, not through perks and charisma, and certainly not through fear, but through simple, consistent actions that connect us to other human beings.
This is such an interesting topic because I don't think many people look at trust through a lens of having a system for building and creating it. But it is so important because there's this popular saying, I'm sure you've heard it, that trust is actually the currency of business. And in fact, trust is the currency of just about every interaction we have in our life. But I don't think that many leaders fully appreciate how costly it is when trust breaks down on their team. And so I'm curious, in your experience, what do you think makes trust such an easy thing for leaders to overlook in their leadership?
That's such a good question, and a big enough question that requires more time than I have to think about it. Here, but I'll try to put my finger on one of the main reasons, I think. Um, and it holds true in my experience, and you can let us know whether this holds true in your experience.
Okay.
I think for us, whether it's entering into a new relationship, right? Because all of these principles and tools we've been talking about apply in every dynamic of human engagement that we have in our lives at work and in our personal lives. But I think for all of us, when we enter into new personal relationships, there is this excitement and this hope and this kind of aspiration of what this relationship can be for both of us, what we can accomplish together, whether it's in friendship, whether it's in intimate relationships, whether it's in growing our family, whether it's in starting a business or joining a new team in a workplace. There's that initial excitement around, wow, man, we all seem to like each other and there's enough chemistry and connection. But the reality is we are human beings. And so give us enough time and we will begin to step on each other's toes. We will begin to
Right.
operate in ways out of stress, anxiety, fear, resentment, bitterness, and a whole host of other personal experiences that will lead us to behave in ways that will break trust with others. Others will inevitably do the same with us. And so what happens is trust begins to deteriorate between these two parties. And over time, because most of us don't understand how human relationships are built, because that's not something most of us have studied through our lives, because of the fear of being injured again or injured even worse than we've already been injured, because we're carrying around all of the woundedness and the trauma and the pain from our past, the risk begins to increase. And all of us as human beings, we have a risk tolerance of how much we're willing to entrust ourselves to others based on how likely we are to experience injury. And I think for that reason, I know that's a long-winded answer, but for that reason, I think in order to get on with the business of business or the business of marriage and family, right? Because family is a business, right? We've got bills to pay, we've got work to do, we've got responsibilities, tasks to be, chores to be done, kids to race to different sporting events. Because we need to get back to the business of doing life and accomplishing things in life. I think it becomes easier to overlook the importance of either building or really rebuilding trust in those contexts. And so we lean into other systems, structures, mechanisms to try and hold people together enough that we can actually accomplish things together.
Yeah.
But I know what you and I have experienced, both in our personal lives and in our professional lives, and working with, now hundreds and thousands of clients, is that ultimately I think what people feel is an incredible vacuum, a deep sense of absence,
Mhm.
oftentimes in their various relationships of their life, whether work or personal, because they know that the lack of trust means that there is a lack of ability to build deeper partnerships. And and I think that leaves a lot of people feeling dissatisfied, disconnected, lonely, unfulfilled. And I think because we are social creatures and we require connection with others, and especially to accomplish anything, bigger than ourselves, we know it's important. And yet I think we all feel this really deep sense of sorrow and sadness that we don't know how, or we think others don't know how to build the quality of relationships that allow us to feel safe, secure, and to be able to weather the necessary storms of trying to do great things together. And I think that's what we're missing. I think that's what we long for. And because we don't know how to get it, guess what? We settle for something far less satisfying and fulfilling.
Yeah. I mean, that definitely rings true. And I think one of the biggest, regardless of what relational arena we're discussing, one of the biggest things at stake when we don't have trust is the whole system feels insecure,
Yeah. Fragile.
fragile. Yeah. We can't, for lack of a better, we can't trust in this. And we might not be able to put language around it, but we sense it deeply that this is not a trustworthy foundation. So I have to protect how much of myself I actually give in this space.
Yeah. And what's interesting is when I think of then what's at stake if we're not able to build these dynamic relationships that have enough trust to support the important interactions that we need to do things together, right? So, number one, I've seen that people stop being honest about their failures, struggles, insecurities. And so, because of that, then we inhibit our ability to learn and to grow and to develop. And so what I've seen and whether it's in my own marriage, whether it's in my relationship with my adult kids at different moments, whether that's in my own business or whether it's the clients we work with, we can very quickly see the indicators within the workplace that there is a lack of trust. And it usually amounts to people, like you said, operating in very self-protecting, territorial mindsets, people unwilling to take personal responsibility to own their mistakes for fear of being exposed, right? Because that's what a lack of trust drives people toward, fear and insecurity, a lack of people's ability to have hard conversations, a lack of people's ability to resolve necessary conflict, a lack of people's ability to exchange and share ideas, and the list goes on and on. But I think for our listeners, in any relationship of their life, it's probably not too difficult to think, do I experience any of those indicators in the various relationships of my life? Because if I am, first of all, to our listener, it's not the end of the world. Like the human dynamic is a very difficult one. And yet the antidote to these indicators and very painful experiences is not to withdraw. It's not to isolate. It's not to say, screw the world and I'm just going to make it on my own. I think the antidote really is the solution is that we can learn how to, what I like to call, prioritize human connection in such a way that we give others and ourselves an opportunity to build or rebuild trust so that we can enjoy all of the benefits of human partnership.
And that's frankly the good news here, that if you are experiencing this, and I'm sure you are, listeners, in some area of your life, it's springing to mind places that you are seeing some of these symptoms arise as a lack of trust. We're going to teach you a tool that will help you systematically and intentionally rebuild that. It's not gone forever. And a lot of us think that, oh, well, this is as good as it's going to get. No, there is this pathway for this to get better. So, Eric, would you lead us into this tool, the trust code?
I would love to. So we're gonna unpack it in simple form. Obviously, in our show notes, people have access to the diagram. that brings this to visual life. Um, I want to say before we jump in, this is probably the simplest uh, tool that we have in our toolkit in terms of there's only 3 ingredients. Um, However, it may be the most significant and profound tool, and one that we often don't get to until later in our toolkit on purpose. Because what we have found is oftentimes people are not really ready to tackle this conversation because it oftentimes creates a lot of tension. It creates a lot of insecurity, because building trust is a two-way street. It's a reciprocal affair. And I think probably the most difficult thing for any of us who would either call ourselves leaders or are aspiring leaders is to ask the hard question, are other people experiencing me in a way that would suggest I am trustworthy? Right? We're always quick to point the fingers and say, well, they're not trustworthy. They're not trustworthy. They broke my trust. They broke my trust. They stepped on my toes. They cheated. They lied. They gossiped behind my back. But how often are we slowing down to ask the question, but are other people experiencing us as trustworthy human beings? All right. So the trust code is very simple. I want to begin by just simply laying out again why this matters, which is simply this: for us as human beings to engage in any noteworthy, worthwhile accomplishment in life requires that we partner with others. I mean, think about it. We can't even build a family without a significant other and having children. And that means we require other people. You can't build a business by yourself. It's impossible, because even if we build a remote business from our private computer in our bedroom, we are interacting even digitally with other human beings in other places, right? Until AI takes over, as everybody's afraid of, which I don't think it will. Anyways, another podcast for another time.
We'll put all that in.
Another podcast. All significant human endeavors requires partnership with other people. And the challenge with that is that we then have to engage in a way that says, I'm prepared to entrust myself to you, and you're prepared to entrust yourself to me to some degree. And the challenge in that is that all of us from our youngest years have experiences with other people that we trusted who broke our trust. It could be a parent who raised their voice and who had bad temper. It could be alcohol. It could be any form of neglect or ill temper or bad behavior by our parents, which, by the way, all parents are guilty of at some level. And that any human, yeah, and that treated us in a way that broke our trust, that stepped on our toes, that harmed our sense of security and safety. Right. And then it continues on with our siblings, and then it continues on with the kids on the playground. And then it continues on, in sports teams. Then it continues on as we become adults. Like we just continue to experience these painful moments where we feel trust has been broken. And for that reason, as we get older, we become more highly sensitive to the fact that to partner with another human being requires that we engage a significant risk. And the greater the partnership, the greater the risk. I tell my clients all the time, this is why when you want to get married, you go to the altar and you exchange these very, very weighty, vows, like for better or for worse, for richer, for poorer, in life and in death. Like I got your back. You can trust me, is what we're saying at the altar. Yeah. And the reason we have those weighty vows is because, we believe marriage is a weighty endeavor. And, I don't know that anybody gets married thinking, oh, I'm going to probably get divorced in 6 months to a year. Nobody thinks that. I don't think anyway. I've never met anybody who says that.
I know.
But we understand that there's a huge risk. We're entrusting our finances. We're entrusting our livelihood. We're entrusting our health. We're entrusting our sense of purpose in the world. We're entrusting so much to this other person that it requires this kind of level of trust. We make vows, commitments to one another. It's no different than when we enter into contracts with vendors or customers, no different than when we enter into business contracts with partners to do business together. That we put a kind of contract because we understand the weight of the risk. And so in any human dynamic where we want to partner with somebody else at any level, we have to mitigate against that risk. And to do that, we need to build what I call a bridge over that cavern that stands between two people that represents that risk. And I call that the trust bridge. And the bridge is only as strong as there is a reciprocal degree of trust between the two parties. I can build my side and it can be pretty strong, but if the other party is not building their side, the bridge is weak. because we both know that if a bridge isn't really a bridge at all,
I wouldn't get you anywhere.
I don't get you anywhere, right? And the stronger the bridge, the more weight it can carry, the more risk it can tolerate, the more storms it can weather. The weaker the bridge, the more fragile, it was the word we used earlier, the higher the risk, the greater the fear and insecurity. And most people, if they feel insecure standing on a bridge, they will quickly retreat back to the side of security.
Yes.
And this is what happens in our relationships. So we've distilled, like, there are loads of books and podcasts and so many resources on building trust between human beings, so many great ones out there. But in our work, we're constantly trying to simplify and distill these very important, profound leadership principles into very simple, accessible, practical, tools. So if we think of a Venn diagram, 3 overlapping circles, those 3 circles represent 3 ingredients, each ingredient being important and necessary in building trust. And so when all 3 are overlapping, that's where you have the conditions within which trust can be built. And to the degree that one or more is missing or weakens, it weakens our ability to experience trust with one another. So the 3 ingredients are very simple. And for those who have listened to a previous podcast when we talked about emotional intelligence and others' awareness, how we engage other folks, this will be reminiscent. If anybody's read our book, Leadership Gravitas, for our viewers, if this ends up on YouTube, this is the book, Leadership Gravitas, which unpacks the 3 core skills of others' awareness. And there's kind of a mirror imaging between these 2 realities, because how we engage others largely determines our ability to trust and to be trustworthy. So 3 ingredients. The first one is that people need to feel seen. People need to feel seen. And so what does that mean? Human beings have a fundamental need to feel seen for who they are. They need to feel that others can see and appreciate life from their perspective.
Yeah.
So as a leader, we have to ask ourselves, what is my ability to communicate to others that they are seen? What is my ability to engage them in a way that I'm able to see and appreciate life from their perspective? Right? Because so often as human beings, we come to life kind of with our view, our perspective, our beliefs, our convictions, our values. And we tend to impose those on other people, to expect that other people will see the world the way we see it. And that's just, quite frankly, doesn't happen. Anybody who's been in a significant relationship for longer than a few weeks realize, oh, wow, we have very different views on a lot of different issues. And where that can feel very threatening, what I remind people is it's actually an incredible gift to humanity that we're all different. No matter how similar we are, even siblings growing up in the same household, we understand they actually have very different life and family experiences because of the different stages of the parents, blah, 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 and on. But it's important to understand that for other people to feel seen, they need to know that we see and appreciate life from their perspective, right? Their view, their understanding, their particular interpretation of their experiences. And too often, especially in the workplace, we're in a rush to make decisions. We're in a rush to solve problems. So we don't take the time to slow down and to actually show interest in others, right? The worst opposite of what we're talking about would be forms of prejudice, racism, bigotry, where, we've kind of drawn these negative conclusions of other human beings based on, their preferences, their background, their political views, maybe their economic or social views. And so we kind of put them into a box and kind of label it unacceptable, bad, not okay, right? That's the worst case. But the reality is, within our relational experiences, it's amazing how quickly what I call subtle forms of bigotry and negative bias and prejudice begin to creep in. So for example, if I'm in a rough patch with my wife, or I feel like we're not connecting and communicating well, it's amazing how quickly I start to develop a negative bias toward her. So that when I come home, it's almost I'm looking for her to do something that's going to upset me. I'm looking for a way that she's not treating me well, or I look for a way that she might be neglecting me, or I look for a way that might be communicating, my feelings of her judging me, or, being critical. None of which may be true, but because we've been through a rough patch, without even realizing, I developed this negative bias right, toward my own spouse, whom I love to death and whom I want to be married to for the rest of my life. It's just, we have to really be careful as human beings. And that in the same way we talk about rose-colored lenses, where we start to see everything with flowers and rainbows, and it's a distorted view of reality. The opposite is true. We develop, for lack of a better word, phrase, shit-colored lenses, right? Where we just start to all we do is we interpret the worst possible, thing from other people, and it actually diminishes and minimizes our ability to engage with them. It diminishes their feeling of being seen for who they really are. And it actually creates a sense of distrust between two parties. So again, what does it mean to see each other? It means to see each other for who they are, their best and their worst bits, to accept them, to value them for who they are, and to establish a value in another person, not based on our affinities and how we are alike one another, but based on the intrinsic value that the other person brings because of just the fact that they exist. I'd
Yeah.
love to hear your thoughts, reflections, questions as you're kind of reflecting on that.
I it I just want to remind everybody listening that our brains are meaning machines. And so we are constantly seeking to create when there's a lack of understanding, our brain is creating that bridge. So it's a really important reminder that if you are seeking to build a trust bridge, the bridge of trust, it cannot be done based on assumptions. You have to start the process with intentionally choosing to see people. And like you said, that's not to say that we have rose-colored glasses. We can appreciate everything that a person brings. We can have an understanding of everything, that the gold and the dirt, as we like to say. We don't have to just ignore the hard things that people bring, but if we don't see them and do that intentionally, then we are going to be creating assumption bridges, which are the opposite of helpful in this situation. So I have a question for you though. If we are seeking, we're on this process, we're like, okay, I'm bought in, trust code, we're going to do this. What's one way I can start to intentionally choose to see people?
Yeah.
Do you have
Yeah.
any tips for us?
Yeah. It's a great question. Like, how do we communicate to others that we see them? And I'll say a couple of things. Number one, it's recognizing, like verbally recognizing those qualities in others that are valuable, recognizing whether it's their intelligence or their sense of humor, whether it's recognizing a particular skill that they bring to the table. It's recognizing the fact that they ask good questions. And it's recognizing the way they dress. They're very, fashionable, right? It's just simply calling out value in another human being, right? I appreciate your background. I appreciate your education. I appreciate all that you've been through, what you've overcome, right? I appreciate the way that you've maintained your composure through a very difficult time. The opposite as well. I deeply appreciate how painful this might be for you, right? Because our emotions and the things we experience are valuable. So what I would encourage people is to think, how do I communicate and call out value in other people? And the challenge is that oftentimes we don't see value in others except the value we see in ourselves. And so as leaders, we have to push beyond our own comfort zone of what's familiar to us, and to ask and to really press kind of the bounds of what we value.
Yeah.
And part of that journey is spending time with people who are different to us and leaving room for the fact that they will bring value that at first may actually feel threatening to us,
Yeah.
right?
Uncomfortable. Mhm.
Uncomfortable. But the more time we spend with people that are different to us, guess what happens? We begin to see the value, experience the value in those differences, which allows us then to call it out in other people as well.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, what's the next step? What's the next circle?
The next ingredient, right? So I said this very important phrase. Human beings have a fundamental need to feel seen. And I'm going to come back to that for each ingredient. Human beings also have a fundamental need to feel heard. So seen and heard, not just seen. Like, I see you in the room, I see the value you bring. I want to call that out. I want to affirm you. I want to recognize you in this space, that you belong here. But they also have a fundamental need to feel heard. And by heard, I want to say it's two things. It's feeling heard verbally, right? So creating space for people to share their opinions and their perspectives, especially in meetings. Very oftentimes it's the extroverts who take up all the air in the room, and the introverts are never, never have a chance to talk, right? So it's slowing down to say, hey, I want to hear from some people who haven't had a chance to share. Um, it's inviting people to share their opinions and perspectives, even in moments where you give them permission. You don't have to be right. I just want to hear what you're thinking right now, right? So it's inviting people to make their voice heard, especially when their voice may be contrary to popular opinion, when their voice may be antagonistic to what our perspective may be. Again, making others feel heard does not mean we have to agree with them. It does not mean we have to see eye to eye with them. It does not mean we all have to sing kumbaya and view the world the same way, right? Because this is not about agreement. This is about human connection. And so when we invite people to share their perspective, their dreams, their hopes, their aspirations, their fears, their insecurities with judgment, when there are strings attached, all bets are off. People will withdraw. But when we can invite people to share what they think, where they're coming from, their views, without strings attached, without fear of judgment, criticism, or condemnation, without fear of being penalized, what people call psychological safety, right? People feel heard. They not only feel seen now they start to feel heard. The other way people need to feel heard is human beings communicate 70% of what's going on non-verbally. We often miss this. We often miss this, right? We're not paying attention to people's body language. We're not paying attention to how they show up to a room, how they sit in a chair. We're not paying attention to a lot of nonverbal cues in other people. Have they shaved? If they normally shave, maybe they didn't shave. You're like, hey, I want to pay attention. I want you to feel heard. You're communicating a lot of nonverbal things, and I want to recognize that. And it doesn't mean I'm coming to judge you or criticize you. It just means that I'm curious to know more about you, who you are, and where you're coming from right now. And so I just want to encourage our listeners to pay attention. It's so easy. A child is quiet at the dinner table, and we just kind of write it off as, wow, they must be thinking about something else. They must be busy. They must be stressed about school. And so we don't ask. We don't inquire. We don't get curious. And so I would suggest that the practice of making other people feel heard is the practice of curiosity. Tell me more. Help me understand. Explain to me. I want to dig into that deeper. I'm curious about you, who you are, and what it is that you may be trying to communicate.
Yeah, that is so good. And I want to circle back on this because I think it's such an important lost art in our current culture, that hearing people, this practice of making people feel heard is not equivalent with agreeing with everything that they say.
Yeah.
We can hear people and engage in dialogue about being curious about their perspective. That doesn't mean that we come to the same understanding. That's not the goal of this. Building trust doesn't mean we always agree and have the same understanding of every situation. It is the process of allowing somebody to express their concerns, their viewpoints in the midst of what could potentially be a conflict conversation.
That's right.
And so often nowadays, we think that in order to come to any type of a conclusion, that conclusion has to be agreement. But when we're building trust, agreement is much less important than these ingredients that we've talked about before, of helping people feel seen and helping them feel heard. They can feel disagreed with as long as they feel seen and heard.
That's right. That's right. 100%. And I tell, we work with leaders all the time who are struggling to figure out a way forward with their team on a particular decision, some matter of business. The leader oftentimes will feel threatened by disagreement,
Yeah,
different viewpoints. And I have to remind the leader, actually, creating room for disagreement and different viewpoints is what creates ownership in the meeting, right? Because I don't think very few people actually expect that their leader is going to do everything they think.
Sure.
But when somebody feels unseen and unheard, what will happen is they feel rejected. Whether we like it or not, they will feel rejected. They will feel devalued, and they will now become, at worst, contentious, difficult, and create a lot of unnecessary conflict. But even at best, they will withdraw, they will isolate, they will stop sharing or contributing, and they will feel pushed out. So I tell people, if you want to create ownership in your team, even with your kids about a big decision that your family's making, it's to bring them into a conversation, to make them feel seen and heard, and to appreciate their perspective, even if you as the leader make a decision that is different.
Yeah, absolutely. So important.
Third ingredient.
Here we go.
So every human being has a fundamental need to feel seen, heard, and valued. And here's what I mean by valued, right? Because value can be communicated in a lot of different ways, and we'll walk through some of the practical examples of that. But valued is really about putting our money where our mouth is. We know what we value financially because we can just look at our budget and our checkbook or our balance sheet and see what we are spending our money on. That's what we value, right? It's very simple. Our calendars will reveal what we value in terms of our time, right? Because they are essentially a budget of our time. What we value most is where most of our time is going to go. And that was a freebie for our listeners. Most people don't think about that. Okay. I want us to think. If we want other people to feel valued, then we have to invest our value into them.
Yes.
That's the simple way we think about it. If we want other people to feel valued, then we have to invest our value, whatever we have that's valuable, into them. Now, what do we have that is valuable? Let's walk through some of the basics. Our time, our energy, and all of our resources. Right? So our time, we've talked about that. We can spend more time with people. We can give them a few extra minutes. We can meet with them before or after a meeting. We can also give them our time in terms of giving them a day off, giving them a half day, giving them time to go recover, right? So we can give time. That's because it's a value that we have. It's a commodity we have that we can actually invest in somebody else. And what about our energy? We can partner with other people. We can come alongside of them. We can brainstorm with them. We can offer them our energy. We can offer them our resources, right? We may have, like for example, I have this client that, I mentioned that I'm going to be going and staying for a few days in a particular area. And the client said, "Hey, I've got a house out there that nobody's staying in right now. Why don't you make use of it?" And I thought, what? So incredibly generous. But what was that client doing? They were saying, "I value you and I want you to know I value you. So I'm going to invest my value into you."
Yes.
All right. We can also do this through our words of affirmation, our words of encouragement, right? So I just want our listeners to pause for a moment and to think all of us have so much value, right? And one of our later tools, we're going to talk about the capitals, the forms of capital currency that we have in our lives at our disposal. Well, all of us have far more currency than we realize, right? Time, energy, money, the words, our knowledge, our skills. There's so many, our relational capital, our reputation. To simply ask this question: if I want to communicate value to somebody else, it requires that I invest one of those capitals, my value, into that person. When we do that and they feel valued, what happens? Now we've got all three ingredients at work. And what that does is it begins to build the fabric of that trust bridge. It begins to communicate to the other party, you can trust me, you can entrust yourself to me because I'm communicating to you a degree of trustworthiness. Because the fundamental need for a human being to feel seen, heard, and valued is the fabric of trust.
That's right.
From our infancy all the way to our last years on earth, we will build trust with other people based on these three ingredients, whether we realize it or not, whether we like it or not. And I can tell our listener, whether it's in my marriage, with my children, with you, Dawn, as one of my team members, with our clients, with the person at the grocery store, when I'm checking out from Starbucks. It doesn't matter what I'm doing in every relationship of my life. The more that I pay attention to the 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 level of trust that I need with the other individual to be able to partner in some activity, and just pay attention to making sure, am I offering, investing enough of these three ingredients that would suggest the other party can endure the risk to partner back with me and
Yeah.
reciprocate the three ingredients.
Yeah.
So let me pause there, because that's a lot that we've talked about. Of course, we said it's
It's a
simple,
lot.
very deep and profound. So I'd love to hear what
True.
you think of this.
Yeah, I think one thing I want to touch on when it comes to value, one thing that we can leverage, I love that you touched on time, energy, finances. A great way that we can leverage for people, a great way we can invest our value in other people is through our connections. So when
Yeah.
we, especially in business, when we can introduce people to people that we are connected to, that's a really valuable way that we can share our value with them.
That's right.
We're opening a
That's why
road.
they say that word of mouth marketing is still the most powerful form of marketing, because human beings are hardwired to say, well, if you trust them, then, and I trust you, then there's a good chance that I can trust them as well.
Right. So if we've already been doing this work of building trust, let's say with a networking partner, a business partner, we've already been building that bridge. We can essentially, when we share our trust that we've built with them, with somebody that already trusts us, we're like giving them a hack for building this bridge. The bridge is already halfway completed for them because we are we're loaning them our credibility, our relational capital that we've built with them. So I just wanted to touch on that really quick. But
That's great.
I want to ask you this question. In your experience, you've worked with countless leaders and teams. What shifts when a team truly starts to do this work and build this trust and feel that type of connection with each other?
Yeah, it's a great question. Let me, a couple of examples. One is a little different than we talked about earlier. I'm going to switch gears here. I'm going to call an audible. I'm going to share a personal example. In my marriage to my wife of 23 years, anybody who's been married longer than a few weeks knows that you're going to go through multiple rough patches, right? Where there's a feeling of disconnect. And the feeling of disconnect then leads to an erosion of trust, which then drives you to want to disconnect even more. And so we've had to work really hard over the years to regularly in these times wrestle with what's missing in our relationship. And I can tell you without question, every single time is boiled down to a lack of reciprocation. Because what happens is once we feel our toes are stepped on, somebody's broken a little bit of trust, guess what? Oftentimes we start to withhold these ingredients from the other party, which then only contributes to a greater breaking and erosion of trust. So my wife and I, you get to a point where like, oh my gosh, man, the trust bridge in our relationship is getting real feeble right now. This is not okay. It could fall through. We need to do something. So obviously we've, spent time securing marriage counseling, going to mentors, inviting trusted friends into our journey. But ultimately what it comes down to is us discovering where we are not investing these three ingredients into one another. And I think so often we think it's something else. It's some mystery. It's, well, we just weren't meant to be, or just not, you're not my soulmate, whatever excuses we want to make. But at the end of the day, we have different passions and ambitions. We've
grown apart,
outgrown each other. And what you really want to say is, no, you've grown out of trust.
Mm-hmm.
You've grown out of trust. And again, I'm not suggesting that there are never times when relationships don't need to end, but I am suggesting this, and always for my wife and I, it's always come back to. As a matter of fact, I would suggest that in every relationship of my life that I reflected on, ones that have endured and are stronger today than ever, and others that I've lost, I can always go back and diagnose pretty easily, pretty simply, where there was a lack of the reciprocation of these ingredients between myself and the other party. And sometimes that was on me. And I
Mhm.
learned a great deal about, wow, I was not operating in a trustworthy fashion. I was not investing these ingredients into the other party. And so my part in that bridge was it grew too weak. And the other party felt like, hey, does not feel stable for me. And who am I to judge somebody else for their risk tolerance? Like, everyone's got a different risk tolerance, for different reasons. Right? Now, who am I to judge them? I realized, wow, yeah, you know what? Maybe I didn't build the trust very well. And of course, it happens the same in reverse. But in my marriage, I'm so grateful that when I simply go back to this tool, I can very quickly diagnose. And nowadays, what my wife and I spend less time doing is, running into these really intense moments, but really just constantly nurturing our partnership by fighting to intentionally invest these ingredients into one another. I do the same with my adult kids, with my business, my team. Um, the other example is a little different. We started working with an organization some years ago, and when we first started working with them, they revealed all of the possible indicators, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, that
Yeah.
trust had been sufficiently eroded, and to the point where an entire executive team was siloed, fragmented. They had all basically hunkered down into their specific areas of responsibility and really had created a bunch of siloed departments within the
Yeah.
organization that did not communicate well, did not play well together, could not resolve conflict, blamed one another for everything going wrong in the organization. They brought us in, which is why companies bring us in, right? Because people are struggling to work well individually and collectively, and that's where we come in. And it took a great deal of time of getting to the place where they could even have this conversation around the currency of trust and how they're if we think about like a bank account, the bank accounts were completely in the red in all of these relationships. But then their willingness to own it at some point and just to recognize, wow, not only have other people broken trust with me, but I've broken trust with them. That was a massive turning point. And then we
Yes.
together began to work on the simple three ingredients that we're talking about today. What does it look like to communicate to others so that they feel seen, heard, and valued?
Mhm.
What does it look like to be willing to open ourselves up again to let other people communicate those ingredients to us after trust has been broken? And what's amazing is it was not overnight, but over time, trust was slowly but surely rebuilt to the point where today, that team, that executive team genuinely sees one another as their first priority
Yeah.
before they prioritize their own departments, which is not the norm. In most
Mhm.
organizations with multiple divisions or departments, the leader of that division or department really sees their division department as like, this is my family, and the rest of you guys can piss off because I got to protect my family because us against the rest of the organization. Where in this case, you have this incredibly healthy expression of an executive team who all is responsible for different divisions and departments, but who really genuinely not only see one another on the executive team as their first team, but also regularly invest these ingredients, build trust with each other, and when trust is broken, because it's going to happen because we're human beings, we're going to step on each other. So their ability to rebuild, to recover trust, and to
Mhm.
rebuild the strength of those bridges is absolutely phenomenal. It's what's made this company um, obviously more productive, more effective, more efficient, but it's also made it more profitable in the same way because, like we say, people are the engine of the business. And when the people are operating well, the business goes well and profitability and productivity goes up. And when they're not, it doesn't.
Yeah, and I love that example because it is the perfect example of it hope is never lost. I mean, this team was very when we say trust had eroded, there was basically we were starting from scratch, and yet
I wouldn't even say from scratch. We were starting from a massive deficit.
negative. Yeah, yeah, we were starting from a deficit, but with these practical steps and with their commitment to engage in the process, they were able to build trust to the point where not only is the business more profitable, but it's a more enjoyable experience for the
Yeah.
people on their teams, which cannot be undervalued. But
Yeah.
that to have that team say things like, I actually enjoy coming to work with this team now. To hear them say things like, we were able to take bigger risks as a business because we trusted the people in this room more.
That's right.
That's what's at stake when we talk, listeners, about building trust on your team.
That's right. Couldn't agree more. I love it. Are we ready for some practical application?
Let's do it. And how do we get there?
Yeah, so let's give our listeners a few things that they can reflect on, and it's good for our listeners to know that these are the questions we ask in our coaching calls with our clients, right? It's always about, first and foremost, as leaders, practicing self-awareness. Like, where does the rubber hit the road in this conversation for me? How can I take personal responsibility for myself in this kind of conversation? So here's the first question for the 3 ingredients: see, hear, value. I would encourage our listener to ask the question, on a scale of 1 to 10, how good do you think you are in this season at communicating those 3 ingredients to the closest people in your life? Just like the, 2 to 3 closest people. It could be a spouse, children, it could be coworkers, it could be parents, it could be whoever, right? Roommates. How good do you think, at communicating see, hear, and value to other folks? That's one question. The second question, we're going to take a little deeper here. How do you think those same people would rate you on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of how they experience you communicating see, hear, and value to them? And I'm going to take that a little deeper, right? Because now we gotta push beyond our own self-perception as well. I wonder how they would perceive me. And let me give us the third reflective question. This requires some courage.
It does.
But if you dare, dear listener, I would encourage you to consider going to those 2 or 3 closest people to you and asking them, hey, I want you to listen to this podcast. I want you to hear these 3 ingredients. And I would love for you to reflect back to me, to give me some feedback on, what do I do well in each of these 3 ingredients? And what do you think I might be able to work on? And that's a safe question, right? Because it's not asking for you, where are you bad? Where are you weak? Hey, what are some areas that you think I might be able to work on? And that takes a lot of courage to go to anybody and ask that question about yourself, because they're going to give us feedback, some of which may be really encouraging and some of which may expose some potential blind spots. Now, for our advanced listeners, our advanced application, the last question, and we get into this in our coaching. We're not going to do this in the podcast today, maybe in a later episode. But what most people very rarely ever slow down to consider is this: how good are we at building trust with ourselves? Because what most of our listeners forget about is that we have a relationship with ourselves. We talked about this in an earlier tool through the lens of self-awareness and self-leadership. Our listeners will do well to remember that we have 20 to 30 plus thousand self-talk moments a day. That means we're talking to ourselves. We have a relationship with ourselves. We have a perception of ourselves. We have a value for ourselves. We have a view of ourselves, our strengths, our weaknesses, the value that we bring to any situation. Like, we have a full-blown relationship in the same way we do with others. We have it with ourselves. And the moment we wake up to that, we can ask this question: how good are we at building trust with ourselves? How do we communicate seeing ourselves, hearing ourselves, valuing ourselves? And this one's advanced application, because this one can be really difficult to do, but I would recommend anybody who's willing to take some time, sit down, jot down some notes, process it with a trusted friend, or give us a call at Empower Coaching. We'd love to debrief any of this. Matter of fact, I don't know if we ever say this, but for all of our listeners, you can go to our website, mpwrcoaching.com, and sign up for a free 1-hour coaching call with myself, Dawn, or one of our other amazingly brilliant coaches. And we would love to process any conversation that they're engaging with in these podcasts, and just help them reflect more deeply on their journey.
Absolutely. And this last application, yes, it's advanced, but it's also important, because what do we say all the time? You can only lead others to the extent that you lead yourself. So if you cannot see, hear, and value yourself, you are not going to be doing it very effectively for others. So it's a tough one, but it's an important one. And it's something I was reflecting on. It's a space that I've been leaning into lately, because I recognized for myself, I hadn't been doing it well.
Yeah.
That's I'm personally.
Can I add one note before you kind of end our podcast together?
Please.
I just want to say this to our listeners because we're far enough in. Listen, we just started this podcast a while back. We're doing our best to just really give out the value of content and conversation to anybody and everybody out there that we would give to our clients. But we've not been able to land on what's the right amount of time for a podcast. And I think one of the things we determined is that these podcasts are going to be as long as they need to be. And if they're 18 to 25 minutes, great. If they're 25 to 45 minutes, great. If they're longer, great. Our goal is not to make these bite-sized or, really lengthy podcasts. It's just simply to share as much value as we can in as short a period of time as we can to make sure that we honor these conversations. And so for our listeners, you may have to continue from the car to the gym, to your walk, to whatever you're doing. But I would encourage you just to, finish these podcasts because there's value all the way up to the last breaths that we offer.
That's right. That's right. And please subscribe because next week we are diving into the productivity pendulum. And this is where we are pulling back the curtain to reveal the secret to how you finally stop living in this burnout and busyness cycle that we all find ourselves in. Just like with the trust code, where there's a practical process that we teach people how to build trust, we have a practical process to teach you how to stay out of that burnout cycle. And as Eric said, if this episode hit home for you, or if you'd love to kind of dig deeper with some key people in your life, share this episode with them because it's going to give you a common language that you can begin to excavate some of these truths here together. So go ahead and share this podcast. And lastly, as always, in our show notes, we have our tool diagrams and a free resource for you, 5 shifts to become the leader that you wish you had. And I want to leave you with this today. Trust is your greatest leadership currency. Spend it wisely and rebuild it with intention.